Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Reviving Vet Med. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing burnout prevention and more specifically, whose responsibility it is. It seems clear that veterinary team members are feeling burnt out more than we ever have before. And I think that reasons for this are many, but certainly increasing demands for high quality animal care, a shortage of veterinary professionals, and quite honestly, a broken veterinary system are all likely contributors. So the question that a lot of people ask me is, well, whose responsibility is it to manage or prevent burnout among veterinary professionals amidst these difficult times? Is it the veterinary professional themselves? Is it the system that needs to be fixed? Or is it something in between? So during this episode, we are going to review the different causes of burnout among veterinary team members, and we're going to break down what experts suggest in terms of individual, job, and organizational contributors to burnout, and what the general recommendations are in terms of helping to prevent or manage burnout. I'm also going to share a practical tool that's available for download, and we will dig into some examples and research that has been published. So with all of that said, I'm really excited to share this information with you. So let's go ahead and get into the episode. This is the Reviving Vet Med podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Marie Hollowaychuk. My mission is to improve the mental health and well-being of veterinary professionals around the world. All right, so why don't we start today by defining burnout? Typically, when people talk about burnout, they are referring to chronic, unmanaged workplace-related stress. And there's different stages of burnout, and we're not going to get into that information today. If you want more information on the stages of burnout and specifically habitual burnout, you can refer to one of my previous episodes. But today we're going to really focus on the symptoms of burnout and the causes of burnout. Now, when we think of burnout, we typically think of three different symptoms. Now, you don't have to have each one of these symptoms. You could have one symptom and still be considered to have burnout. But the symptoms are emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, or what some people refer to as cynicism, or a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. So when it comes to emotional exhaustion, I think this is pretty obvious to most of us. This is where we feel just emotionally overextended or depleted. Our work just feels exhausting. And when we think about diagnosing people with burnout, we typically will use the Maslach burnout inventory. And one of the statements in the Maslach burnout inventory survey that relates to emotional exhaustion is, I feel emotionally drained from my work. So if you believe that to be true, then you may be experiencing emotional exhaustion. Depersonalization or cynicism is where we have an impersonal response towards our clients, our patients, or our team members. So this is where we really start to separate ourselves. We develop, a bit of a shield in terms of caring for others. And according to the Maslach burnout inventory, a person who is experiencing cynicism or depersonalization would say, I don't really care what happens to some patients. Then last but not least, we have reduced personal accomplishment. And this can look a little bit different depending on the individual. This can be a person who's feeling really incompetent, that they can't get anything done right, that they are not good at their job, or they're not good certainly at the tasks that they've been assigned within their job most recently. And this can also look like an individual who is still doing well within their job, but they're just not accepting anything as success or as an achievement. And so a person who's experiencing this would say to themselves, I have not accomplished many worthwhile things on the job. So these three symptoms are what we would typically see with burnout. Now, of course, the research when it comes to burnout is quite exhausting, and it is somewhat contradictory. So there are different scores that you can use. The Maslach burnout inventory is used most commonly, but there are certainly other scores and systems, and there are other beliefs in terms of what other symptoms are really indicative of burnout. But we're not going to get into that in today's episode. Really, what I want to focus on from here forth is to really look at the causes of burnout, because, so often people will say to me, well, I'm feeling really burnt out, and, it's this job, or it's this profession, or it's the organization that I work for. Whereas others will take all of the responsibility on themselves and not recognize that there may be other contributing factors. So let's break down these factors so that we can really get down to, the meat and potatoes of whose responsibility is it. So when we look at factors contributing to burnout, there are definitely some individual factors, and those might look like working very long hours, even working multiple jobs, which we certainly see amongst some of our vet techs and nurses, having off-shift responsibilities. So maybe you're on call, maybe you are doing additional work or things for your work out of hours. Can be an absence of work-life separation, where there is just no separation between your work and your home life, that you are dealing with work stuff at home constantly, or that you are just not able to ever really turn yourself off or really gain that separation from work. Certainly not taking vacation or days off in a long period of time can be a contributor to burnout. And I think we definitely saw that over the course of the pandemic, where people were postponing vacation or simply felt that they couldn't take time off because of coworker illness or short staffing. Having an absence of social supports is another contributor to burnout. So not having people who you work with or in your life who you know that you can count on or that you can go to when things get tough can definitely be a contributor. And then not engaging in self-care as well can definitely contribute to burnout, especially if, when it comes to self-care in the form of boundaries, work-life separation, and so on. Now, there's a lot of other factors as well, and some of these relate more to the workplace itself rather than the individual's decisions. And those are things like not having a lot of control in the work that you do. So I think this is why we see in some contexts more burnout amongst emergency care providers, and not that in general practice, you don't see emergencies or walk-ins. Certainly I know that to be true. But in the emergency environment, it really feels often as there is nothing within the control of the team. And so certainly that can contribute to burnout. Working in a very demanding workload is also a contributor. And I think all veterinary teams are experiencing this right now, where whether it's true or not, that pet ownership or animal ownership seems to have increased, and demand for high quality veterinary care has increased as well. And there is just this huge strain on what was already kind of a bursting system beforehand. Lack of recognition or reward is another really big contributor to burnout. And we see this not in all veterinary environments, but certainly in some, where individuals don't feel that their work is valued or that they are being rewarded or recognized for the hard work that they do. Unclear expectations is another contributor to burnout. So when people work in environments where their job description is unclear, or where things change in management and it's unclear whether things need to be changing for the employees as well, and so on and so forth. Then we have workplace toxicity, and this is definitely a contributor to burnout that has been well researched in the companion animal veterinary space. So we've got companion animal veterinary studies that demonstrate that those individuals in all members of the team, in terms of veterinarians, animal care attendants, and vet techs and nurses, when they work in environments that are toxic, where the communication is breaking down, where people are not being held accountable, where people don't address things that need to be addressed, those contribute to workplace toxicity, and that workplace toxicity increases the risk of burnout, and it increases the sense that a person wants to leave their job, what we refer to as job dissatisfaction. So we know that to be true in the veterinary space specifically. Interpersonal conflict is a big part of workplace toxicity, especially when it's not addressed. And there is a lot of research outside of the veterinary space to demonstrate that interpersonal conflict is a huge contributor to burnout among individuals. Values incongruence is another thing that we talk about a lot in the burnout literature. So values incongruence is basically when an employee has certain values that are not aligned with the organization. So I'll use an example in the context of vet medicine. If you as a veterinarian or veterinary team member really value high quality care, really strong veterinary client-patient relationships, you are going to want to work in a practice that is going to allow you to have long appointment times and is going to allow you to practice high quality medicine and to refer cases when it's indicated. And if you work in an organization that does not value those things, that wants to serve as many clients as possible, at as low a rate as possible in terms of cost, that does not value the importance of specialty care or referral medicine, you're going to have a lot of incongruence there, and that is going to contribute to your burnout over time. And then last but not least, one of the big factors that we see contributing to burnout in the workplace is insufficient resources. So we're seeing a lot of this right now in vet medicine where we just don't have the staff. We don't have sufficient front staff. We don't have sufficient support staff. We're short on veterinary professionals, veterinarians specifically as well. This is all contributing to difficulty getting the work done and is going to lead to burnout. And insufficient resources don't necessarily just have to be personnel. That can be, that you don't have the equipment that you need to do certain things, or your computer systems aren't working, or the computers themselves are crashing all the time. Your printer is not working, whatever it might be. All of this is going to lead to burnout over time. So lots of different factors when we think of burnout amongst veterinary professionals. Now, I mentioned before that I get asked the question a lot, whose responsibility is it? And even if I'm not asked the question, I see this a lot on social media. I see people saying, stop blaming the individual, stop telling individuals to do self-care. We need to fix this broken system. And when I speak to my colleagues and friends in the veterinary well-being space who work on fixing systems, I say to them, that's all fine and good, but as an advocate for individual veterinarian and support team mental well-being, what do the individuals do in the meantime while the system is being fixed? There's things that the individuals can do. So the short answer to this question is it's everyone's responsibility. And I'm going to share with you some information in the context of this that I learned from a book that I read recently. So I've been diving into a lot of burnout related literature from human medicine. And this particular book actually isn't from human medicine. It's from, it's written by a physician, but it is in the context of all veterinary workplaces. But it's called Anti-Burnout, How to Create a Psychologically Safe and High Performance Organization. It's written by Drayton. And what's really interesting, and actually I'm just realizing, I don't think that he's actually a physician. Pardon me, he's a coach and consultant and a clinical psychologist. That's his background. So this book was exceptional. And what I really took away from this book as one of the key points is that there are multiple contributors to burnout in the workplace, in all workplaces, and that the responsibility falls on many different levels. So he really breaks it down where he talks about the responsibility being on the individual, where there are certain individuals that are more predisposed to burnout, and where all individuals can take steps to prevent and manage their burnout. Then he talks about it being the job. So the job itself, what about the job is causing burnout? Again, whether it's the hours, whether it's the responsibilities, whether it's the people who you are working with that you have conflict with, lots of different things that we can consider on a job related perspective. And then lastly, he talks about the organization, specifically with regards to culture. He talks about the culture of organizations being a culture of well-being, or a culture of burnout. And what I want to do with you for the rest of this episode is I want to take you through these different contributors, and I want to talk about responsibilities on the part of the individual, of the manager of the team, whether it's the hospital manager, practice manager, manager of whatever team within whatever veterinary industry within this profession that you work. And then lastly, the organizational leadership. What is their responsibility in all of this? So let's start with the individual. And, the individual really in my world is who I tend to focus on. I really, again, in alignment with my mission, which is to improve the mental health and well-being of veterinary professionals around the world, I want to give individuals the tools and strategies that they can use to take care of their wellness. So when it comes to individuals managing or preventing burnout, we think about things like setting boundaries, listening to what you need, working within your limits. When two people on your team call out sick, that you do not just take the workload for everyone, but that you set a boundary. You say, we're going to have to reschedule some of these appointments. Or if I'm going to see all of these walk-ins today, we need to rebook some of my surgeries or whatever it might be. But those boundaries are paramount to preventing burnout. I also talk a lot about self-care for individuals. So self-care, we know, is necessary for the work that we do as a caregiving profession. So making sure that you are carving out time in your life to take care of yourself. And that goes for everything within the context of wellness. You're taking care of yourself financially, socially, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in a work-related context, intellectually, and in terms of your environment, that you are taking a holistic approach to everything that will help you from a self-care perspective. Then on an individual level, we talk about that work-life separation and having some time and space in your day or in your week where you are not doing anything work-related, where you have separation from that. You can turn off work completely and you can devote time specifically to the things that bring you joy, to the things that fill you up, whether that's your pets, your family, your hobbies that you have, that you are having that separation so that you do not feel like you are in a constant state of work. And I'll talk about this from a management perspective. Certainly there's a bit of overlap here in terms of responsibility, because inevitably you can say that, you're having this separation between work and home life. But if your team or your manager is still suggesting that you need to be available, then that is not going to be conducive to burnout prevention. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Social supports I talk about a lot. So knowing that you've got people in your life who you can lean on for support, for advice, for encouragement. This is so important. Arguably one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves is to have the names and contact information ready for people in and outside of the profession, but hopefully people who understand veterinary medicine and can really advise you when you feel distressed, when things come up that you are having difficulty coping with. Also, again, I talked about this with work, life separation and boundaries, really recognizing that it is our responsibility to take those breaks, to honor our limits, to say no when things do not align with our value system, to put our foot down essentially when things are non-negotiable or deal breakers for us from a health and well-being perspective. So I have lots of strategies when it comes to this. And I have created a PDF that you might be interested in downloading if you want to learn more about these strategies for individual burnout prevention. It's called 10 Tools to Tackle Burnout and Achieve Balance. And if you go to my website, mariehollowaychuk.com/subscribe, you will be prompted to subscribe to my newsletter. And after doing so, you will receive that PDF download. So please take advantage of that. Now, moving on to the job related factors or management. And again, in the veterinary profession, I think of the context of, I think of this, in our context in terms of a hospital manager, a practice manager. If you work at in industry or in academia, this is going to be whomever you answer to. So when I was in academia, this would have been my department chair. So there's different contexts for this, but basically I'm talking now about the person whom you report to, who is your direct line manager type of thing. And, the research around this is really interesting. There's research in the human well-being, workplace well-being forum to demonstrate that individuals who work under a manager who has high levels of well-being are themselves much more likely to also have high levels of well-being. So the research suggests that we are very much impacted by our direct manager. And it makes sense. I mean, I think of different workplaces where I've been where my manager has been always at work and, always in their office, and it's great that they're always available, but at the same time, you look at them and you think, well, if they're always here and they're always working, I don't feel like I have permission to leave work on time or to step away when the work is done or whatever it might be. So the manager is really, in essence, setting an example of, what is allowed or what is okay within the context of our job. So we hope that as managers, for any of you who are listening who are managers, please set an example for your team. I talked a lot before about martyrdom mentality and feeling like we all have to just, be sacrificing ourselves for this profession and for vet medicine. And I really want us to get away from that. And this really starts with managers to demonstrate what boundaries look like, to demonstrate what work-life separation looks like, to keep the workload manageable. So other things that managers can do as well are to watch the caseload and to watch the staffing levels. And if staffing levels are not conducive to what the workload is asking, then management needs to make a decision about potentially limiting appointments, closing doors, hiring locums, whatever it might be, but that falls on management's responsibility. I also ask managers to honor the boundaries of their team members. So when a team member has said, look, I'm on vacation next week, I'm not going to be available to follow up on my cases, that a manager is going to make sure, hey, that's okay. We embrace you taking this time off. We don't want to disturb you. We will find so-and-so to follow up on your cases. So don't worry about that. And if we do email you, you are not expected to reply until you are back at work. So those are other things that managers can do. They talk a lot about control as well in the context of burnout prevention. And I've seen this a lot in the vet tech literature. Vet techs really find benefit in terms of burnout prevention, in terms of having control over their schedule, over their day. And I think a lot of this stems from the fact that vet techs and vet nurses have so little control over their jobs. It's like they're constantly at the whim of like what the veterinarian needs and what others need. So anywhere a manager can give a team member control, this is going to help prevent burnout. So whether this is control over scheduling, control over when they want to take a break, control over what extra projects they might take on, or whether or not they want to take extra shifts or do on call. Giving control to the team members is extremely important. And of course, I mentioned before about workplace toxicity and interpersonal conflict contributing to burnout. And it's, again, the responsibility of the manager to help resolve that conflict. And maybe you don't have to do all the conflict resolution yourself, but maybe you can empower your team to resolve the conflict amongst themselves, but that you hold people accountable. If people are not behaving the way that is, within the values of the practice, or if they are, contributing to conflict within the team, that you are facilitating resolution of that and that you are holding people accountable to their actions is extremely, extremely important. Because let's be honest, nobody wants to work in an environment where people can just behave however they want, whenever they want. It's a big contributor to burnout because it just feels so unpredictable and unsafe from a psychological perspective. And then, another thing that managers can really focus on is making sure that resources are available. And I know that managers are doing their best in terms of hiring individuals and locums and so on to fill the gaps. And this goes too for making sure that equipment is fixed when it's broken, and that if people are saying, hey, we need more computers, that you listen and you get more computers and, various things like that. So ensuring resources are sufficient is really, really important as well. And then last but not least, that third role, the organization, or what I'm going to talk about in the veterinary context is organizational leadership. So this is, the practice owners or the corporation that you work for and the leadership within that corporation. But when I talk about organizational leadership, I'm talking about the decision makers at the top of the organization or the practice or the company. And these individuals are the individuals that determine the culture within which we work. And why is culture so important? Because you can have a culture of well-being or you can have a culture of burnout. And this is true within all work contexts, but it's especially true within the veterinary context. So in the context of veterinary medicine, are you working within a culture that has a lot of benefits, specifically mental health and well-being benefits for the team? Do you talk about mental health openly within the workplace? Is it a psychologically safe environment where you can speak up and say when you disagree, or if you have ideas, or if you're not comfortable with something, or if you've made a mistake? And is it a culture that puts the team members first over the clients as well? And I think for so long in veterinary medicine, we have been a profession that has really put the clients first. The client is always right, et cetera, et cetera. I think we have to step away from that. I do not think the client is always right. I understand it from a customer care perspective, but at some point we need to look after our teams first and foremost, because if we don't have a team, we can't deliver care to the customer or the client. So if a team member is being bullied by a client, or they're, experiencing things that are not okay from a client perspective, we need to make sure that the employee's well-being is first and foremost in our minds. And maybe that client needs to go somewhere else, or maybe we need to set a boundary or have a conversation with that client. But simply saying that the client is always right, that is not going to foster a culture of wellness. It is going to foster a culture of burnout. The other thing to consider is the values. And if you have particular values within your organization, please make sure that you are hiring individuals who are congruent with those values, because that values and congruence is going to lead to burnout as well. I do think that this falls on the manager's responsibility as well as the organization, but making sure that leadership is recognizing and rewarding team members for the incredible work that they're doing. So this obviously means sufficient salary, but it also means, just recognizing, having appreciation opportunities when people are, working on call. Are they being compensated for that? If people are staying late or working extra, are they being rewarded for that in some way? And I think we need to get away from the thought that, people just want more money. I don't think it's always about the money. And there's a lot of research to indicate that in the veterinary profession, a lot of veterinary team members don't necessarily need more money. What they want is, time. They want more time with their family. They want time off. They want their working conditions to be more favorable. Or maybe you can reward them with things that are going to make their life easier, like a food delivery service or a home cleaning service, or, something along those lines. And then the last point that I'll make in terms of organizational responsibilities with regards to reducing burnout is to have clear expectations for the team. And this starts with clear job descriptions. What exactly is required of a veterinary associate? What exactly is required of a vet tech or vet nurse, and so on and so forth. It can be very disruptive to the team and very conducive to burnout for the individual when the expectations are not clear. So I think there was a long period of time where we didn't really have job descriptions in vet medicine because it was sort of like, well, you're a vet tech, just be a vet tech. But a vet tech's responsibilities at one practice can look extraordinarily different from the responsibilities within another practice. So please do this service to your team by having very clear job descriptions and roles that are outlined for those on the team. So to summarize what I've talked about in today's episode, burnout is a result of chronic unmanaged workplace-related stress, and there are a lot of contributing factors. We've talked about those different factors, and we've broken down responsibilities on the part of the individual, the management in terms of making sure the job is reasonable, and the leadership in terms of making sure that the organization is being held accountable for creating that culture of wellness and not a culture of burnout. So lots of information to take in today, all with the hope of reducing those burnout symptoms that we talked about, the emotional exhaustion, the depersonalization, and the reduced personal accomplishment. That is ultimately the goal, reducing it, managing it, or preventing it altogether, which is what my perfect world would look like. So that's it for this episode of Reviving Vet Med. I hope that you are coming away with a better understanding of burnout in the veterinary profession and all of the factors that contribute. And I urge you, whether you are an individual, a manager, or in a leadership role, to think about one thing that you're going to do right away after listening to this episode in order to prevent burnout amongst your team or for yourself. And I would also love it if you could take some time to subscribe to the podcast. You can also leave a rating and review or share the podcast with someone else. This really helps to spread the word and to get information like this out to others in the veterinary profession. And if you're interested in the resources from today's episode, please do check out the show notes. I mentioned the PDF download for 10 tips for managing burnout, and you can access that download by going to mariehollowaychuk.com/subscribe. Also, if you are interested in my 4-week online program, From Toxic to Terrific, Cultivating Wellness in the Veterinary Workplace, I am really excited to say that registration is open for my September 2022 program. If you go to mariehollowaychuk.com/register, you will find information for that program. It is also approved for 8 hours of continuing education credit in jurisdictions that recognize race. So it's a great opportunity to get some CE credit and also learn more about how to promote wellness within your workplace. I'd like to thank my amazing assistant, Jamie, for producing this episode. And of course, I'd also like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions about today's episode or suggestions for further topics, please email me. My address is info@mariehollowaychuk.com. I hope you'll tune in next time. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. Bye now.